Pay attention to the footage you're about to see. This image was captured by home health aide Jennifer Collins on her phone when she arrived for a routine wellness check in November 2022. Look closely at the hospital bed, at the medical equipment scattered around the room, at the woman barely visible beneath the medical apparatus. Notice the expired medication containers on the bedside table. Notice how there's no one else in the room. What you're looking at is the result of over 7 years of systematic abuse, a woman who was turned into a human guinea pig by the person who promised to love her. This is the bedroom where Elena Moretti was left to die by her own husband, and what happened to her is beyond anything you could imagine. You know that moment when you meet someone and think they might just be the one? For Elena Vasquez, that moment came in the spring of 2014 at a medical conference in Chicago where she was teaching a wellness workshop. She was 31 years old, a dance instructor with her own studio in Denver, the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. Her students loved her energy, her passion for movement, her infectious laugh that could turn a bad day around. That's where she met Dr. Marcus Moretti. He was giving a presentation on metabolic disorders, talking about groundbreaking research that could change how we treat obesity and diabetes. Brilliant, charming, ambitious. Marcus seemed like the whole package. He was 36, had degrees from prestigious universities, and worked as a pharmaceutical researcher for Helix Biosciences. After his presentation, Elena approached him with questions about nutrition and metabolism for her dance students. They talked for hours. Their courtship was straight out of a romance novel. Marcus would send her research papers with little notes in the margins. Elena would invite him to her dance classes, laughing as he tried to keep up with her choreography. To everyone who knew them, they seemed perfectly matched, the scientist and the dancer, logic and art coming together. Her parents adored him. Her friends thought she'd won the lottery. When Marcus proposed in December 2014 on the ice rink at Millennium Park, Elena didn't hesitate. She said yes before he'd even finished asking the question. They married 6 months later, in June 2015, in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the mountains outside Denver. It should have been the beginning of a fairy tale. Instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would take 8 years to unfold. The changes started small, so small that Elena didn't even notice at first. After the wedding, Marcus suggested they take a more scientific approach to their health. He'd just started a new research position at Helix Biosciences, working on something he called cutting-edge metabolic research. He talked about it constantly, how they were on the verge of major breakthroughs, how his work could help millions of people suffering from metabolic disorders. "Let me help optimize your health," he told Elena one morning over breakfast. "I've developed a supplement regimen that could boost your energy, improve your performance. You're an athlete, babe. Imagine what you could do with enhanced metabolic efficiency." Elena trusted him completely. Why wouldn't she? This was her husband, a doctor, a scientist, the man she loved. So when he started preparing her daily supplements, little capsules and tablets he measured out precisely each morning, she took them without question. He kept detailed logs of everything she ate, how much she slept, how her body responded to different foods and activities. At first, she thought it was sweet. He cared about her health. He wanted her to be the best version of herself. But here's the thing about trust. It can blind you to what's happening right in front of your face. By October 2015, just 4 months after their wedding, Elena had gained 23 pounds. She mentioned it to Marcus, concerned because she was still teaching 5 dance classes a week, still eating healthy, still active. He told her not to worry. "Your body's adjusting to the supplements," he explained. "This is actually a good sign. It means your metabolism is becoming more efficient at storing energy. Give it time." She gave it time. The weight kept coming. By January 2016, she'd gained another 30 pounds. Her dance classes became harder. She got winded more easily. Her students started noticing, though they were too polite to say anything. Her mother called, worried, asking if everything was okay. Elena made excuses. She was just stressed. She was getting older. Her metabolism was changing. All the things Marcus had told her to say. Marcus converted the entire second floor of their house into what he called his home research lab. He said he needed the space to work on his research after hours, that Helix Biosciences didn't provide enough resources for the kind of groundbreaking work he was doing. Elena rarely went upstairs anymore. When she did, she found it strange. All those computers, the refrigerated storage units, the locked cabinets filled with vials and tablets. But Marcus assured her it was all legitimate, all part of his work. "I'm going to change the world," he told her. "My research is going to help so many people." What she didn't know was that she was the research. She was the human experiment he'd been planning for years. By mid-2016, Elena had closed her dance studio. She couldn't teach anymore. At 285 pounds, moving had become painful. She spent most of her days at home, taking the supplements Marcus gave her, eating the meals he prepared, documenting her symptoms in the journals he provided. He'd convinced her that she had developed a rare thyroid disorder, that the weight gain was a symptom, that the treatments he was giving her would eventually reverse the condition. "You have to trust the process," he'd say whenever she got discouraged. "These things take time. Science doesn't work on our schedule." Her family grew more concerned. Her sister Maria visited in August 2016 and was shocked by the transformation. Elena had gained over 150 pounds in just over a year. Maria confronted Marcus, demanding to know what was going on, why Elena wasn't seeing other doctors, why she wasn't getting better. Marcus was smooth, convincing, professional. He showed Maria medical reports, forged, though she didn't know that, explaining Elena's condition. He talked about experimental treatments that weren't widely available yet, about how Elena was lucky to have access to cutting-edge therapy through his research. Maria left worried but reassured. After all, Marcus was a doctor. He loved Elena. He was doing everything he could. The truth was so much darker. Marcus was systematically administering a cocktail of experimental compounds, hormones that disrupted her metabolism, appetite stimulants that made her constantly hungry, medications that affected her thyroid, and insulin production. He was deliberately destroying her body, documenting every change, every symptom, every measurement. She was subject E1 in his research journals. Not his wife, not Elena, just a test subject. By early 2017, Elena weighed over 370 pounds. She was almost completely homebound. Marcus had convinced her that her condition made her too fragile to see other doctors, that the stress of appointments and tests could trigger dangerous complications. He'd isolated her so completely that she rarely saw anyone outside of her immediate family, and those visits were brief and supervised. She lived in a prison of her own body, and her jailer was the man who slept beside her every night. Let me paint you a picture of what Elena's daily life looked like by this point. She'd wake up around 9 in the morning, already exhausted. Marcus would bring her breakfast in bed, meals he'd carefully prepared, loaded with calories and whatever compounds he was testing that day. He'd give her the morning supplements, watch her take them, document the dosage in his tablet. Then he'd leave for work at Helix Biosciences, where his colleagues knew him as a dedicated researcher working on metabolic disorders. They had no idea he was conducting illegal human experiments on his wife at home. Elena would spend the day alone, watching television, trying to read, sleeping. The weight made everything difficult. Getting to the bathroom was an ordeal. Basic hygiene became a challenge. Marcus had hired a home health aide to come 3 times a week, ostensibly to help Elena with her condition, but really to provide basic care that he couldn't or wouldn't provide himself. He was very careful about which agency he used, very particular about the aides who came to the house. He wanted people who wouldn't ask too many questions. When Marcus came home in the evenings, he'd become the scientist again. He'd examine Elena, take her blood pressure, document her weight, ask detailed questions about her symptoms throughout the day. He kept video logs of these examinations, speaking into the camera with clinical detachment about subject E1's progressive metabolic deterioration. In these videos, discovered later by investigators, he showed no emotion, no recognition that he was talking about his own wife. She was just data to him, a very valuable experiment. March 2019 brought a moment that would change everything, though Elena didn't know it yet. She weighed over 500 pounds by this point, completely bedridden, dependent on Marcus for everything. He'd installed a hospital bed in their master bedroom, complete with medical equipment that he claimed was necessary for monitoring her condition. The room looked more like a hospital ward than a bedroom. On March 15th, Marcus made a mistake. He left his research journal on the nightstand when he went to work. For 3 years, Elena had accepted his explanations, trusted his treatments, believed that she had some rare disorder that only he could treat. But something had been nagging at her for months. Little inconsistencies. The way he'd sometimes slip and call her the subject instead of using her name. The locked cabinets upstairs. The way he'd panic if she mentioned wanting a second opinion. She reached for the journal with difficulty. Even simple movements were exhausting now. Her hand shook as she opened it. What she saw made her stomach drop. Page after page of clinical notes. Charts tracking metabolic disruption protocols. Dosage schedules for compounds she'd never heard of. Projections for maximum safe weight threshold before organ failure. And there, in Marcus's neat handwriting, the notation that made everything clear. Subject E1 approaching critical mass. Consider reducing compound dosage to prevent premature study termination. Subject E1. That was her. She was an experiment. Everything Marcus had told her about her thyroid condition, about the treatments, about getting better, all lies. He'd been deliberately doing this to her for years. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the journal. She grabbed her phone, barely able to hold it steady, and started photographing pages. Every chart, every note, every piece of evidence that her husband had been using her as a human guinea pig. She didn't know what she was going to do with the photos yet, but she knew she needed proof. Because who would believe her if she told them? Marcus was a respected researcher. She was a morbidly obese woman who rarely left her bedroom. Who would take her word over his? When Marcus came home that evening, Elena confronted him. She'd had hours to process what she'd discovered. Hours to move from shock to rage. She demanded answers. How could he do this to her? How could he destroy her life, her body, her future for his research? And here's what makes this case so chilling. Marcus didn't deny it. He didn't try to gaslight her or convince her she'd misunderstood. Instead, he sat down on the edge of the hospital bed and looked at her with something like pity. "You have to understand," he said, his voice calm and rational. "What I'm doing is going to revolutionize medical science. The data I've collected from you is invaluable. Do you know how many people suffer from metabolic disorders? How many lives could be saved by this research? You should feel proud, Elena. Your sacrifice is going to help millions of people." Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. He actually thought she should be grateful. Proud. He'd destroyed her body, stolen her life, turned her into a scientific experiment, and he thought she should thank him for it. "I want a divorce," she told him. "I want real doctors. I want out of this nightmare you've created." That's when Marcus showed her who he really was. The mask slipped completely, and what Elena saw underneath terrified her more than anything that had come before. His face went cold, emotionless. He leaned in close and spoke in a voice she'd never heard from him before. "You're not leaving. You can't leave. Look at you, Elena. You can't even get out of that bed without help. You need specialized medical care that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Care that only I can provide. If you try to expose me, I'll make sure you never get the treatment you need to reverse this. You'll die in this bed, alone and abandoned, and everyone will think you just gave up. Is that what you want?" It was a threat and a promise. Marcus had trapped her completely. She was entirely dependent on him for basic survival, and he knew it. He'd made sure of it. For the next 3 years, Elena lived in terror. She took the supplements Marcus gave her because she didn't know what would happen if she stopped. She let him conduct his examinations and record his observations because refusing seemed more dangerous than complying, but she kept those photos on her phone, hidden in a folder Marcus didn't know about, waiting, hoping, praying that somehow, someday, someone would help her. Her weight continued to climb. 540 pounds, 590, 600. The health complications multiplied. Diabetes, heart problems, respiratory issues, pressure sores from being bedridden. Marcus documented it all with scientific detachment. He was approaching the end of his research timeline. He'd gotten the data he needed. Elena had served her purpose. By 2021, Marcus was actively trying to sell his research. Email records later recovered by investigators showed him reaching out to pharmaceutical companies in Asia and Eastern Europe, places with looser regulations and fewer questions about where research data came from. He pitched his findings as groundbreaking metabolic research based on unprecedented long-term human observation. He was asking for millions. Several companies expressed interest. But here's what haunted everyone who worked this case later. Marcus was already planning his exit strategy. He knew Elena couldn't survive much longer. The compounds he'd given her had caused irreversible damage. Her organs were failing. Her body was shutting down. He'd kept her alive this long because he needed the data, but once he sold his research, she was just loose end that needed to be tied up. October 2022. Elena weighed approximately 720 pounds. She was in constant pain. Multiple organ systems were failing. She had severe sepsis from infected pressure sores. She could barely speak above a whisper. Marcus told her family she'd developed complications from her condition, that she was receiving intensive home treatment, that visitors would be too stressful right now. Her mother begged to see her. Marcus said no. Then everything changed. In late October, Marcus received confirmation that a pharmaceutical company in Singapore was ready to purchase his research data for $8 million. The deal would be completed in early January. He just needed to deliver the complete data set, all the journals, all the videos, all the biological samples he'd preserved, and then he could disappear, start a new life somewhere his crimes would never catch up to him. But first, he had to deal with Elena. Keeping her alive was no longer necessary. In fact, she was now a liability. If she survived long enough to tell her story, everything would unravel. So Marcus made a decision that would ultimately lead to his downfall. He decided to abandon her. On November 4th, 2022, Marcus Moretti went to work at Helix Biosciences just like any other day, but he didn't come home that night, or the next night, or the night after that. He'd left Elena alone in that house with just enough pain medication to keep her sedated, no food, no water, and no way to call for help. He'd hidden her phone, disconnected the landline, locked the doors from the outside so the regular home health aide couldn't get in. His plan was simple. Elena would die alone in that house, and by the time anyone found her, it would look like she'd succumbed to her medical condition. Tragic, but not suspicious. He'd already packed up his research materials, transferred funds to offshore accounts, and arranged for a new identity. Within a week, he'd be in Singapore, rich and free, while his wife's body decomposed in their bedroom. But Marcus made one critical mistake. He assumed the home health aide would just leave when she found the door locked. He didn't count on Jennifer Collins being the persistent type. Jennifer had been coming to the Moretti house for 6 months. She'd always found Marcus creepy, the way he monitored everything she did with Elena, the way he spoke about his wife like she was a research project instead of a person. When she arrived for her scheduled visit on November 24th and found the house locked up tight, curtains drawn, no answer when she knocked, she knew something was wrong. She called the agency. They said to skip the appointment. But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that Elena was in trouble. She walked around the house, peering in windows, and that's when she saw it. Elena in that hospital bed, completely motionless, surrounded by medical equipment and waste, clearly in distress. Jennifer called 911. When the paramedics broke down the door, what they found was horrifying. Elena Moretti was barely conscious, severely dehydrated, covered in infected sores, lying in her own waste. She'd been alone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks without proper care, without adequate food or water, without anyone to help her. She should have been dead. That she was still breathing was nothing short of miraculous. The paramedics called for backup. They needed a specialized transport team to move someone Elena's size. While they worked to stabilize her, one of them noticed something strange. Cameras positioned around the room, pointed at the bed. Medical equipment that looked more like laboratory instruments than home care devices. Notebooks and journals stacked on the dresser. Detective Sarah Richmond was the first investigator on scene. She'd been a cop for 22 years, worked hundreds of cases, but she'd never seen anything like this. The bedroom looked like something out of a horror movie. A hospital bed in the center, medical equipment everywhere, expired medications scattered around, and Elena Moretti, barely clinging to life, weighing over 700 pounds. "Where's your husband?" Sarah asked Elena, leaning close to hear her whispered response. "Gone," Elena managed to say. "He left me. To die." That's when Sarah noticed the journal on the nightstand, still open to a page dated October 30th, 2022. She picked it up and started reading. What she saw made her blood run cold. Clinical notes about Subject E1, detailed observations of metabolic deterioration, references to experimental compounds, and unapproved protocols. Sarah called for a warrant immediately. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was a crime scene. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of investigation. The forensics team cataloged everything: the journals, the medication vials, the video cameras, the computers. They found Marcus's research lab on the second floor, filled with equipment and materials that should never have been in a private residence. Refrigerators containing biological samples, file cabinets stuffed with data, a wall covered in charts tracking Elena's weight gain over 8 years. And then they found the videos, hours and hours of footage showing Marcus examining Elena, documenting her deterioration, speaking about her with clinical detachment. In one particularly disturbing video from September 2022, Marcus discusses concluding the study and planning for subject disposal. He was talking about his wife like she was a lab rat he was planning to euthanize. The tech team worked around the clock to access Marcus's computers. What they discovered was a goldmine of evidence: email chains with pharmaceutical companies discussing the sale of his research data, financial records showing he'd transferred over $3 million to offshore accounts, flight confirmations, and fake passport applications. Marcus had been planning this for months. But here's the footage that brought everything together. The video that Jennifer Collins recorded on her phone when she first arrived at the house. Remember that image from the beginning? Jennifer had documented everything when she found Elena, and that footage became crucial evidence. It showed the exact state Elena was in when Marcus abandoned her. The medical waste, the expired medications, the deplorable conditions. It contradicted any claim Marcus might make that he'd left Elena in someone else's care, or that her deterioration was unexpected. The FBI got involved because of the interstate nature of Marcus's crimes and his attempted flight. Agent Michael Torres headed up the task force assigned to find him. They tracked his movements through credit card records and surveillance footage. Marcus had been careful, but not careful enough. He'd driven from Denver to Seattle, stopping only for gas and using cash when possible. He'd checked into a motel near the airport under a fake name. He was scheduled to fly to Singapore via Tokyo on January 7, 2023, carrying 2 large hard drives containing his complete research data. Airport security flagged him when his fake passport didn't scan properly. He tried to talk his way through, but the customs agent wasn't buying it. When they searched his bags and found the hard drives, encrypted files, and $16,000 in cash, they held him for questioning. Agent Torres arrived within 2 hours. Marcus's interrogation was chilling. Even when confronted with all the evidence, he showed no remorse. He insisted that Elena had been a willing participant in his research. He claimed she'd understood the risks and accepted them. He actually said, on camera, that she should be grateful because her suffering would lead to breakthroughs that could help millions. "I'm a scientist," he told Agent Torres. "What I did was push the boundaries of human knowledge. That's what scientists do. History will vindicate me." When they told him Elena had survived, that she was going to testify against him, something flickered in his eyes. Not relief that his wife was alive, fear that his experiment had talked. Elena Moretti spent 8 months in the hospital. She underwent multiple surgeries, intensive therapy, and psychological counseling. The medical team that treated her said the damage Marcus had inflicted was extensive. Some of it would be permanent. She would never fully recover. Her life had been irrevocably altered by the person who promised to love and protect her. But Elena survived. Against every odd, against all the cruelty and neglect and systematic destruction, she survived, and she made sure her voice was heard. The trial began in June 2023. Elena testified for 3 days, describing in heartbreaking detail what Marcus had done to her, how he'd manipulated her trust, how he'd systematically destroyed her body for his research, how he'd threatened her to keep her silent, how he'd abandoned her to die alone. The jury wept listening to her testimony. Marcus's defense tried to argue that Elena had consented to experimental treatment, that she'd known what was happening. But the evidence was overwhelming. The journals showed clear documentation of deception. The videos showed Marcus discussing his wife as a test subject, not a willing participant. Medical experts testified that the compounds he'd given her would have impaired her judgment and created dependencies that made escape impossible. The verdict came back in August 2023. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Moretti was convicted of aggravated assault, human trafficking for the purposes of medical experimentation, and attempted murder. He received 45 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He'll be 94 years old before he's eligible for release. Several pharmaceutical companies he'd contacted faced scrutiny for their willingness to purchase data without verifying its ethical sourcing. Elena's case sparked significant changes in how we monitor researchers working with human subjects. New legislation was passed requiring stricter oversight of any medical research conducted outside institutional settings. Protocols were established for identifying potential human experimentation disguised as personal medical care. Several medical boards implemented mandatory reporting requirements for healthcare workers who suspect abuse. Elena has become an advocate for victims of medical abuse and domestic violence. From her wheelchair, she speaks to medical students, law enforcement, and advocacy groups about the warning signs of coercive control and medical manipulation. She's working with legislators to strengthen protections for vulnerable patients. She's written a book about her experience, with all proceeds going to organizations that support abuse survivors. Her mother visits her every day. Her sister Maria quit her job to become Elena's full-time caretaker. Her family surrounds her with the love and support that Marcus denied her for 8 years. She's in constant pain. She'll never dance again. She'll likely never fully regain her independence. But she's alive. She's free. And she's making sure that what happened to her never happens to anyone else. Elena's message to other victims is simple but powerful. You are not an experiment. You are not data. You are a human being who deserves love, respect, and dignity. And no matter what anyone tells you, you deserve to be saved. This is her story. This is her survival. This is her voice, finally heard. In memory of trust betrayed and strength reclaimed, Elena Moretti, survivor.